A new book highlights the architecture of St. Louis. American City next on City Corner. I'm Steve Potter and welcome to City Corner. There's a new book about St. Louis architecture. It's really fascinating. It's American City. It's part of the American City series. It's St. Louis Architecture, 3 Centuries of Classic Design. And I'd like to introduce you to the gentleman responsible. To my immediate right is William Zabarin, and next to him, Robert Sheroff. Gentlemen, welcome to City Corner.
Steve. Hi, Steve. Thanks for having us.
And I should say that, Bill, you are an architectural photographer.
Correct.
So you took the photographs in this great book, and Robert, you did the text.
I did, yes.
And I think maybe a good point to make right at the beginning is, although, you know, visually that's what's important about this book, the text is also very important, and there's a lot of it.
Thank you, Steve.
Maybe you don't hear that enough, I don't know.
I don't hear that enough, actually.
But it's true. So what you've done is, I think you've identified 50 buildings from very old to more contemporary.
Right. We start in 1835 and went up to 2010.
And St. Louis is significant, very significant architecturally.
It is, very much so. I mean, it is in some ways, I mean, I think of it as the most classical city in America, next to Washington, D.C. So I mean, there's a huge tradition here dating back to well before the Civil War. And it's architectural classicism. It's you know, it's pillars and pediments and stone and classical detailing, which is not the norm, say, in where we are from, which is Chicago, which is very much a steel and glass city.
Right. Well, let's get right into it and see some of the images from this book. You've picked out quite a few here. We have Michigan Central.
This is in Detroit.
Oh, I'm sorry. Which was your first book?
Yes.
Correct.
Right. So here we have an image.
Yeah, this is prior to the St. Louis book. We did a book on Detroit, American City, Detroit architecture. This was 4 or 5 years ago. And the whole idea of this series is to kind of celebrate the architecture of the Midwest, which tends to be overlooked. And again, the first book was Detroit, and this is probably the image most people associate with Detroit architecture these days. It is the old Michigan Central Terminal in Detroit, and as you can see, it is abandoned and the windows are busted out, but it's actually this fabulous building completed right after the turn of the century. The same architects who did Grand Central Station in New York City. An amazing building.
Wow, the Fox.
This should be very familiar to St. Louis people because the same architect who did the Detroit Fox also did the Fox in St. Louis.
I didn't realize that.
Howard Crane.
A man named Howard Crane, who was from Detroit.
And they're duplicate interiors. They used the same plaster molds and repeated it here.
There is the interior of the Detroit Fox, which has the same red columns and extravagant ceiling that you see in St. Louis. There was also a third Fox by the same architect in Brooklyn, New York, which got demolished 20 or 30 years ago. It also had a similar interior.
Yeah, it's a treasure. I know the Fox in St. Louis is for sure.
This is the Guardian Building in downtown Detroit, probably one of the most amazing Art Deco structures in the country by an architect there, Wirt Rollin. I say the interior, which, well, this is actually a detail from the exterior.
That's the top.
That's the
That's
top.
the pinnacle. How fabulous is that? And there's the interior.
Which is Rookwood, right?
It's all Rookwood tile, and what it actually is, it's an American Indian headdress that explodes out into the ceiling. Isn't that spectacular?
Yeah,
It
we
is.
lived in that building for a while. This is the Frank Lloyd Wright house in just outside of downtown Detroit. The Turkel House, one of the late ones, the Usonian
How many
house.
windows and how many doors?
There's something like 27 exterior doors on this house.
kidding, wow.
I mean, a real sort of oddity.
This is McGregor Center.
which is by Minoru Yamasaki, who also did Lambert Field here, who did a number of buildings in St. Louis.
And including the World Trade Center.
But this is the building he did in Detroit. These are the fabulous doors from the McGregor Center.
Isn't that amazing? Totally fabulous. This is Dodge Fountain.
Which is by Izumu Noguchi, also in downtown Detroit from the early 70s.
And what's really neat about this is I saw a later picture, it wasn't functioning 100% when we photographed it, that all those little holes are jets or holes for jets of water that spray out that form a huge cloud, and when the sun hits it, it's a rainbow.
Wow.
So in the economic collapse and fall of Detroit in the early 70s, Noguchi gave Detroit this rainbow machine.
Yeah, that's very
I
delicate.
think we have one more
thing.
Detroit picture, I believe.
And it's a community center on the east side of Detroit from the late 70s, early 80s, by probably the last great modernist architect to come out of Detroit, William Kessler. It's this beautiful modernist pyramid. I mean, even during this period of huge decline, the city was still managing to produce some really terrific architecture. That's the interior of it.
Yeah. What's really interesting is that, you know, when you think of the Rust Belt cities, what we call the Rust Belt cities, Detroit, St. Louis, Cleveland, we picture our visual image as cities in decline.
Yes.
And we may not appreciate or recognize all the good stuff architecturally that's still there.
It's hard to see it. It's
Yeah,
hard to see
that's
it.
the point of what we're doing, very much so.
There's so much chaos around you sometimes you can't see what's absolutely beautiful right in front of you.
Let's continue with some images from your book, American City, St. Louis Architecture, 3 Centuries of Classic Design. I believe we have a look at the Botanical Garden.
This is at the original museum and library building from 1860 at the Botanical Garden, which has been closed to the public for 30 years or so.
Close to 30 years, yes.
Yeah, this
And
building was such a revelation when we finally got inside to see it. George Barnett, who was probably the founding father of all St. Louis architects, was the designer. He was an English immigrant. This is the interior.
And those cases are for specimens. They're not for books. They were for his plant specimens.
Oh, really?
Yes.
And what George Burnett did was, at the very beginning, being kind of the founder of architecture here, he set the bar so high that everything following had to, come up to his standard.
When the book came out, this is the Eads Bridge. Of course, the world's first steel truss bridge by James Eads. I mean, a homegrown St. Louis genius.
Still in use today.
Still in use
today.
There's the underbelly of it. It's like the Eiffel Tower of the Midwest.
Before the Eads Bridge, they had to take boats across, didn't they?
Yes.
They sure did, yes.
The Wainwright Building.
Yes.
That's known nationally, is it not?
This is probably the second most famous building in the city after the Arch by a very famous 19th century architect, Louis Sullivan. The first skyscraper to look like a skyscraper, 1893. Beautiful, beautiful ornamentation there.
Yeah. Washington Gate Terrace House.
Yes, by
Harvey Ellis.
That's at the end of the street where you go into the neighborhood.
Yes.
Yeah.
The architect is Harvey Ellis, a very enigmatic 19th century designer who drifted between a number of cities. Here, St. Paul, St. Joe, Rochester, New York. Eventually, at the end of his life, wound up making furniture for Stickley back in New York.
International Shoe.
International Shoe. What's interesting about this, it's by Theodore Link, who also did the train station.
Union Station,
Yes. Very definitely based on the Wainwright Building. It demonstrates Sullivan's amazing influence down in St. Louis. You see it everywhere. Only in his case, he did kind of classical and Egyptian detailing, whereas Sullivan was more kind of...
But the form and the push of the building is the same as the Wainwright. And you can see that repeating.
Yes. Mm-hmm. I love that photo.
There.
That's the cover of the book, which is Intake Tower number 2, right in the river, for the St. Louis Water Department by another turn-of-the-century genius, Guy Studi. This beautiful little classical palace in the middle of the river. It is the only building in the whole book we could not get into.
In the interior.
Why is that?
We never found out. Everyone was cooperative to try to get us there, but we could never get a boat to get out there.
Even the mayor tried to get us in there and could not get us in there.
Before we look at any more images of the book, let's just talk a little bit about what it took to get there. You two actually lived in St. Louis for some time.
Yes.
did.
And I think you had a loft downtown or something?
We had a loft downtown, and we're based out of Chicago, so we drive here, and we only enter the city over the Eads Bridge, because that's the correct entrance to St. Louis.
Seriously?
Yes.
Oh, yes.
For the last 5 years, you make that sharp little turn, and you come over the Eads Bridge, and that kind of sets the tone. It's the first note entering the city. We lived downtown, and we'd stay for 10 days, 2 weeks.
Across from the old post office, didn't
Yes,
you?
and
The Paul Brown building, which has been converted over into lofts. And we had this beautiful set of bay windows that looked out on the old post office. I always say it was like having the set from La Boheme outside of our window every morning. Completely fabulous.
It was completely great. So we'd stay for 10 days, 2 weeks, and then we'd pack computers and books and prints and everything up and move it back to Chicago and go back to work there.
Was it hard coming up with narrowing your focus down to 50 structures?
Yes.
Yeah.
We initially, in our loft that we had for the first summer, we printed 8.5 by 11 snapshots of everything that we were finding and push-pinned them up on the wall, and we were up over 90. And then we had to kind of like sort it out and figure out what was happening in each period, because the book is linear, and what was the best of each period. And so it was a real kind of, it wasn't a battle, but it was a lot of talking.
And I understand you had some rules that you've been known to break, like no homes, although I know there's at least one in here.
Correct.
And
Yeah.
I guess no derelict buildings was another.
No ruins.
No, we're not showing ruins. We want to show the beauty of the city.
And we
the
work
power.
in it. The general rule is no houses and no churches, though we have broken those rules at times. I mean, if a really extraordinary.
In Detroit, it was the Frank Lloyd Wright House. Here, it was the Henry Richardson House.
Yeah.
And I guess my question for you, Robert, is that you did the writing. It's one thing to find the buildings and to photograph them, but how much you couldn't have known all this ahead of time. What
No.
was that research process like?
I did a whole lot of the research at the downtown branch of the public library.
Which is a pretty incredible building.
It's in the book. It is actually one of the most amazing buildings in the city, I think. But in the arts room, they actually have an extensive file on St. Louis buildings.
Well, we need to take a break. I'm sorry to
Sure.
jump right in there in the middle of that, but we have some more images from the book to take a look. American City, St. Louis Architecture. We'll be back right after this.
Separate raw meats from other foods by using different cutting boards. 3,000 Americans will die from food poisoning this year. Keep your family safer. Check your steps at foodsafety.gov.
A lot of people say government is too messy. Half the people say something's a good idea, and the other half say, well, it's a bad idea. All we hear about is the disagreement, the bickering, the compromises, which can leave a bad taste in our mouths. No wonder so many people are cynical, thinking that nothing good can get done. Actually, messy can be good, like my ice cream sundae. Let's think of our democracy that way. You've got all these different choices, lots of flavors blending together. Then, the only thing you have to worry about is that it gets a little sticky. Am I missing something?
Learn about what you can do to make American democracy stronger by logging on to www.representativedemocracy.org.
So, I got this new family, and I don't know what it is about this one, but she can't seem to put down that toy all day long. Tap, 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 tap. Oh, and she even talks to it. She talks to that more than she talks to him. What's up, bro? Nice shirt. Who's she talking to? Her mom? She talks to her mom a lot.
Steve Potter. Welcome back to City Corner. We're talking about the architecture of St. Louis today with Bill Zabarin and Robert Sheroff. They have collaborated on the book American City, St. Louis Architecture. Bill is the photographer. Robert has written the text. It's fascinating both visually and as far as the text goes, reading about the history of the buildings. And they cover a wide span of, what were the years again for the buildings?
1835
To more or less up to the present,
Up to the
2010.
present.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, it's fascinating. And what you're really doing is trying to document the great architecture in cities of the Midwest. You started with Detroit. This book, of course, is about St. Louis. I think you've got another one in the works, Cleveland.
Cleveland, yes. I mean, the idea is that, I mean, the Midwest was the center of the country for a very long time. I mean, most of these were very wealthy cities in their day, and still are. But I mean, the Midwest, in a lot of ways, kind of fell off the architectural map, and you have no idea what is actually in these cities. I mean, in Detroit, for example, I mean, which was a very wealthy city for most of the 20th century, just about every major architect of the 20th century did a building there. You'd never know it.
Let's take a look at a few more images of the book. And earlier we saw the Fox Theater in Detroit, and you said it's sort of a sister building to our Fox.
Right.
Absolutely.
The
Which,
exteriors.
yes.
The exteriors are different, but the interiors are identical.
Yes.
Oh, there's one detail. One of the two has one extra seat. That's the side door of the Fox. And look at that. That's where you came in with your cello. You know, you're a performer.
Yeah, I always say it's worth the price of a ticket just to sit in there and look around without seeing a show.
outside.
Absolutely. I mean, they described it as Siamese Byzantine architecture at the time, which I think meant anything, you know. I
But
mean,
at the time and even today, there's nothing in this country like that. This is highly unique.
in some ways a precursor to what they do in Las Vegas.
Almost torn
these
down at one
days.
point before the Strausses
I
and
know.
their other
Thank
partners
God for Mary
redid it
Strauss, yes.
in the 80s. I guess it was the early 80s, something like
Oh,
that.
Millis Fountain.
This is Millis Fountain. The Meeting of the Waters, originally called the Wedding of the Waters.
With
only
Union
it was-
Station in the background.
Only it
Right.
was so shocking that they changed the name to the Meeting of the Waters.
And what's great about this is these beautiful sculptures, you look at them, but they look back at you. It's a really fascinating interaction.
The sculptor was Carl Millis, who was based at Cranbrook outside of Detroit, as was Eero Saarinen, as were a number of major figures.
It always
who-
looked European to me. It
Yeah.
just gave me that feel.
Well, he was
I'm no expert.
Millis was.
Yeah, he was, though at the end of his life was based here. Yeah, they're amazing. I mean, as good as anything at Versailles, I think.
Well, you know, I guess if St. Louis is known for anything architecturally around the world, it would be the Gateway Arch.
Yes.
Which,
Iconically, yes.
you know, it is a masterpiece, no two ways about it, by Eero Saarinen, also based at Cranbrook outside of Detroit. One of the really extraordinary structures in the world. A modern structure that is actually monumental and beautiful and awe-inspiring. And a darn good thing, because it involved demolishing 40 blocks of cast iron architecture on the riverfront. The
We
old
lost
Levee
a lot
District.
of interesting
Yes.
buildings, didn't we?
It was a real trade-off. I mean, you know, they gave up the Levee District, but they did get the arch. So
And there's a big project underway right now about redesigning the grounds around the arch, which you probably
Correct.
know about. So
Yes.
they're trying to celebrate the anniversary coming up. This is the Pulitzer.
by Tadao Ando, a fairly recent building here in the last 10, 15 years. This was Mr. Ando's first commercial public project in the United States. He went on to win the Pritzker Prize. A lot of people in St. Louis seem to have a problem with this building, actually. But
Why is that?
well, for one thing, it does really go against the grain of what you think of as St. Louis architecture. I mean, it's you know, it's not classicism. I mean,
It's great space
Oh,
for
yes.
what it's built for, though.
Correct.
Yes. I mean, I always say the one thing that looks a little out of place in St. Louis is Mies van der Rohe, and that is very much based on his work.
Pulitzer is celebrating its 10th year anniversary this year, by the way.
Yeah.
No, it's the modern. It's the clash of the modern. It really is.
And the lack of ornamentation. I mean,
Right.
because St. Louis is about
Decorative.
ornamentation,
Yeah, it's
and
decorative.
the more the better.
Everything in St. Louis, everything from every neighborhood out, all the borders, there's little terracotta, there's little brickwork, There's a little piece of wrought iron, even in the smallest structures. And then Ando comes and does this plain concrete form. And yeah, it goes against everybody. But it's still individually a very beautiful, beautiful structure.
You mentioned brick. Could we talk just a second about St. Louis brick?
Yeah, the beautiful brick.
If you're from here, you're used to seeing all of it. Go to Soulard. But not every city in the country has as much brick as we do, and the type of brick. They say it's beautiful.
It's red. It's beautiful. Where we're from in Chicago, we have this boring brown brick. Yes. And St. Louis is so vibrant, and the clay that this brick is made out of, when the sun hits it, it just radiates. It's incredible. I took a helicopter ride once over the city, and I never, to that moment, realized how red everything is. It's just incredible. Yeah, other cities don't have the red brick.
No, and architects used it so beautifully. I mean, William Ittner, who is one of the most famous architects to 19th century architects, come out of Chicago. I mean, specialized in brick. His family owned a brick company. He was famous for his brick designs.
Well, his
and brick
signature in
patterns.
all his buildings will be the crisscross pattern of the brick.
Yeah.
And so yeah, brick plays an important part here.
Yeah.
We have a fascinating new little area. Downtown's been open, I guess, I lose track of time. Maybe it's more than a year now, maybe. City Garden. Have you had a chance to see that?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, what's your reaction to that?
I think it's very well done. We love the restaurant.
We do love the restaurant. But how exciting in downtown.
Yeah.
What was really just basically grass lots now is sculpture, and really good sculpture. There's a Legere there that's spectacular. I mean, it's all over.
What's neat is to go there on a weekend and really see it in use.
Right.
I mean, that's cool. I mean, the city seems to be embracing it. And you see the kids running through the fountains, and then, you know, the adults looking at the art, and it gets people downtown, you know? And it's not a sporting event.
Right. Well, we've always had crowds for sporting events,
Yeah.
but maybe this is true of Detroit and Cleveland and the other cities that you're dealing with, too. We're so used to the decline of our downtown
Yes.
from decades ago, where there were so many years when you wouldn't see people downtown. Maybe some of the office towers had people during business hours, but other than that, people weren't around,
No.
and that is slowly changing.
Well, there was nothing to do. There was no cultural activity downtown. They had the library. City Museum was a huge boost here.
Yeah.
But even in downtown Detroit, they put in a little tiny park, really is much smaller than City Garden, that has an ice skating rink. And it is packed. It's just packed. And it's all this activity that's taking place. So if people have something to do, they will come.
Well, and we also hear about losing buildings over the years, and I was wondering if that's as big a problem as they say it is. I mean, do you feel like we have lost a lot? I mean, you're going to lose some anyway. But have we lost too many?
But I mean, they've saved a lot. I mean, the preservation movement here, started early and really has been pretty effective.
There's a lot missing, but it's a testimonial to the quality of what's standing and how beautiful it is. And it kind of it doesn't balance it back fairly. There's a lot of vacant lots. And, as preservation, I say nothing should be lost. But no, what am I trying to say? What's here is so important now, not to lose it.
And I mean, the goal, of course, is to find, a new use for these buildings, not just to save them. I mean, we were here a couple weeks ago and toured, it's a new architectural office just off Tucker, where Canon Design is.
Canon Design
It's
is. It's an old power plant.
It's an
just
old power
across
plant.
from just east of City Hall.
Yeah.
And the whole time we were here, it was nothing. It's huge glass windows, casement windows, and all the windows were smashed out and broken. And now it's been restored.
It is the most extraordinary design studio I've ever seen.
And it was
They did a phenomenal
it was
job.
the power station. They had
Yeah.
the power machines in there, and there's 6 gridiron verticals. And Canon Design removed everything but the 6 vertical steel beams, and they cantilevered everything off them. And when you walk in there, you gasp because you're like, oh my God, it's huge. There's 3-story ceilings, and
It's inspiring.
it's really inspiring.
Yeah. They found a new use for what was an abandoned building.
I can tell how passionate you both are about this topic, about architecture, and I know you consider yourself preservationists. So was this something for both of you that you were always drawn to, and if not, how did that happen?
I think, yeah, I know I've always been drawn to it. I mean, part of it, I mean, I think it's living in Chicago so long, where architecture is kind of a religion in a way. I mean, and you either join the Louis Sullivan religion, or the Frank Lloyd Wright religion, or the Mies van der Rohe religion. those are huge identifying factors up there. I think that had a lot to do with it. But you know what? I mean, as a kid, I was always one of those kids who was building towns, you know, and you know, I mean, imagining the scenarios that went on in those towns. I probably should have been a planner, you know.
Right. No, I'm privileged because my parents, every weekend, we grew up just outside downtown St. Louis, and we would drive down to the waterfront, down to the river, and we'd pick up cobblestones and we'd go look at old buildings. And I was always exploring with my family the city.
Bill's father, for a while, had the railings from what bridge?
On the McKinley Bridge.
Oh, no kidding.
We had
In
part
the
of we
backyard.
had part of the fencing of the McKinley Bridge stashed in our
Probably a
backyard.
story there. Is that legal?
Well, he bought it at scrap, but he's
Oh.
so passionate about the city, he thought that was just great, till he realized what it would take to maintain it.
What about new buildings? Now you feature some new, more contemporary buildings in your book that are beautiful, but how can I put this? I'm not talking about St. Louis in particular, but when we're talking about new construction, is there a lot of junk that's going up? And can you afford to build the kind of quality buildings that they did 100 years ago and 140 years ago?
Well, I mean, there's always a lot of junk. I mean, it's not like everything was wonderful 100 years ago. I mean, 90% of it back then was junk too, you know? And yeah, I mean, I think there's lots of beautiful work being done. I mean, I think the Pulitzer is a completely extraordinary structure. I mean, a picture that flashed on the screen that we didn't get a chance to talk about was that Mile-Lynn lily pond at Barnes Jewish Hospital. I mean, which I don't think costs an arm and a leg, but is really gorgeous and ethereal. And I mean, I don't see how you cannot be moved
There
by
it
it.
is.
Yeah, that's by Mile-Lynn.
Yeah. who
And Mile-Lynn,
did
of course, designed the Vietnam War Memorial in Washington, D.C.
And there's the pond, and then there's that circular viewing platform that extends out over it, and you can see it is kind of fritted with white lights. And this is the Ellen Clark Memorial, and Ellen Clark was a longtime supporter, volunteer, just about anything you could be at Barnes Jewish. And those lights, they recreate the night sky the day she was born, which
That's
is
Robert
Christmas
Sheroff.
Day.
Robert, I have to cut you off there.
1959.
Unfortunately, we have time constraints during this program because I could talk to you forever about architecture. I know I could.
And we could talk forever too.
And Bill Zabarin is here. Good luck on your Cleveland book,
Thank
by
you
the way.
very much.
Thank you.
And you know, as someone that grew up in St. Louis and has been here for so long, even I was fascinated by this book, things I'd never seen this way before. So great work for both of you. Thanks for being
Thank you,
here.
Steve.
Thank you, Steve.
American City, St. Louis Architecture. I'm Steve Potter. Thanks for watching.